to get it to where we can work today. But the good news is you're here to hear Ellen, not me. So I will do my best to speak as little as possible and let Ellen talk as much as possible. So Ellen is the Vice President of Global Policy and Public Affairs at Circulor. Am I saying that right? Right? Correct?
You've got it right. Circulor.
Okay. Where she engages with corporations, policymakers, NGOs, and press on the sustainability opportunities within complex industrial supply chains. She's dedicated her career to advocating for clean technologies, running successful campaigns for technologies such as electric vehicles, renewable energy, renewable energies that shape market dynamics and create new business opportunities. She's held senior positions at Samsung, Audi of America, and the American Wind Energy Association, working internationally across policy, communications, and corporate development. She holds a degree in political science from Villanova and currently is in Munich. Is that currently where you are now?
That's where I am now. But you're
Lovely.
not far from where I grew up, which is Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. So
I was just there this past weekend.
Yeah, I know Austin well, and it's fun. I'm sorry that the trees are attacking you, though, Dr. Rhodes.
It happens every year, so we just have to go through it. So we'll do our best to get here. So in reading through Circular's website, it says that Circular provides the most complete and mature solution for the pressing global problem of enabling companies to gain visibility into their supply chains, to demonstrate responsible sourcing, improve their ESG performance, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and manage supply chain risk. Now, supply chains have been in the news lately for a whole host of different reasons, things like not being able to get my Amazon package on time or increased prices or things like that. Can you just give us a quick rundown of what supply chains are, why they're important, and maybe what some of the issues are right now?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. It's a pleasure to be with you. So supply chains basically are charged with getting our goods from A to B, right? From maybe raw material to final product and to the consumer. They've been in the news lately, but they've also been on the news for a long period of time. You've mentioned Amazon, a number of goods, chips, semiconductors, automotive, used cars even. Honestly, we're kind of failing in getting our goods from A to B. So they work until they don't. And they're supposed to work, they always have, until they don't. And many people think we don't know much more than our tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. So when they don't know, we're really often caught off guard that they're not working. And so what Circular does is it provides visibility into the supply chain from raw material to finished product, through one end, out the other, through one end, out the other. So we were just listening to a conversation about the energy transition, and Circular really started with batteries, with cobalt in the DRC for Volvo. That was our first project. So taking an amount of cobalt, giving it an identity, assigning that identity or digital twin, and then following it through the process and attributing digital inputs at every stage to that material, so that at the final product, say a battery, we know that cobalt had no child labor, took this route to get there, used this much CO2 at every single stage. And then we could assign that final product with an identity. There's also, of course, when you're tracing these things, there's surety of supply. You can see your supply chain. You know your players within your supply chain. Many companies don't. So one of the first important tools that we do is we map your supply chain. So for those who don't know beyond tier 1, tier 2, well, we can get down to the cobalt or the lithium or the mica and tell you who the players are, so that you can see those bad actors or good actors, see what's working, see what's not, and make changes that are best suitable for the business.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it seems really important in traceability seems really important in this kind of clean energy transition for some of the reasons you've laid out around, making sure that you're sourcing your materials from, good places and not rewarding bad actors for what they're doing. Can you talk about any of the synergies that you've had between your company and like other businesses? What other products or what other initiatives and things you've taken with other companies?
Yeah, so I'll speak mostly about batteries because I think it's most applicable here. It's also part that I'm most passionate about. So we'll just kind of stick on that train. But yeah, so Volvo was really our first customer. We do many materials for Volvo now, many BEV and PHEV platforms. We've also extended to their sister company Polestar and are working to get to, by 2030, we'll track all the materials of the Polestar Zero by 2030. So not just the battery, but everything else. I think just right now, it's businesses are making claims, investors are looking for sound investments, but the proof is getting squishier and squishier. It's like, well, how do you compare one to the other? What's a sound investment? What's not? Can I market myself as clean if I have this data? So really, it's about establishing the proper data so that companies, investors, consumers can be, regulators can be sure about what they're kind of stamping as green.
Yeah, that reminds me of other things like carbon offsets and things and trees. It seems like there's a pretty big backlash against some of the claims that people have been making around those types of things too.
So part of that,
yeah,
and just to add on to that is, so we track the physical material, right? So the cobalt out of the ground, we can see who mined it, where they mined it, that there was no child labor, that they were substantial, that they were paid effectively, et cetera. We can take that cobalt and take it all the way into a battery. But at every stage too, we also get inputs of the energy mix that each supplier is using. So let's say that the final end producer or manufacturer really wants to lower their CO2 in their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. They'll see who's causing me a spike here, who's raising my numbers, and who's preventing me from achieving my CO2 and my ESG goals. Then I can work with that supplier, or I can choose a different supplier, and I can really put data behind what are my emissions deep into the supply chain as well.
Oh, nice. Is there, so we've talked a little bit of how you've worked with other companies. Like how is this also interacting with policymakers and those at the, and those at the governmental level?
Yeah. So, I mean, last week, the SEC came out with their proposal for scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, climate disclosures, right? And scope 3 is in there. And I think there's a question of, well, how do you calculate it? Well, that's a question or a methodology that has to come to be in terms of calculating that scope 3. But again, going back to what we just talked about, which is we think that scope 3 emissions is more accurate when it's tied to a physical material and allotted to each product. So that's why we do what we do. When it comes to other policies, one that's coming up is the EU battery regulation. So they have been working on a battery directive. The directive came out December 2020, which gives a battery like in an EV or an industrial battery. And now actually it's applying to a lot more kilowatt hour capacity battery packs. They will need an identity. They will need to be shown that they are produced with under a threshold of CO2. And they will need a digital passport from which people can see, is this battery safe? Where did it come from? Is it responsibly sourced? Does it was its creation endangering our planet or people? And that proof is getting assigned to some of our very critical assets like batteries and the materials that make them.
So Circulor is a global company. How do regional policy differences impact, the viability of tracing, if any?
Yeah, well, so as an American in Europe, I task myself to be this bridge and connector. So wherever people I hear things over here, or I hear things in Washington where people can connect and they should break those silos. Often it's about connecting them and having them have pretty productive dialogues. So a lot of the time it's about sharing. It's also about, I guess, on the EU battery regulation, that really is causing waves globally because it will be the most stringent policy on the global market. And so companies will want to comply. Now, companies are also leading that charge as well. For instance, a Volvo, Volvo and Polestar published its full life cycle assessment of its battery or of its car, including data from Circulor on portions of that car. So those are some never before done tactics by companies that really see themselves and charge themselves to be a leader in the space. So both the regulations are pushing it, but also companies are as well, in terms of if they're willing to get out there and they're feeling confident about the data that's behind it, then they're able to market to a whole new value proposition.
Absolutely. So what are your thoughts or efforts to track, global emissions of all of the type of in real time?
Yeah. So I wish we could do like more faster. This is obviously a journey. So we don't do the whole car yet. We do the whole car by 2030. We do cobalt. We do almost everything that makes up a cathode and anode of a battery. We also do other materials as well, plastics, et cetera. So I guess my kind of frustration is like wanting to speed up, but it is a journey. And as we know, like technologies can disrupt, and they disrupt not only businesses or the technological environment, but also people's processes, their ideas of how things can get done, their missions, et cetera. So it's an evolving process that takes some patience.
Yeah. Do you have a feel for what taking a car? What's the hardest thing to track? And I'm putting you on the spot there, but I don't know if is there something that's demonstrably harder than other things to track?
Well, I think cobalt is difficult, and it will increasingly be difficult because you have most of it comes from the DRC, and most of it is owned by non-Western country companies, right? So getting data out of that area is challenging. I think what's important is that in the energy transition is that we continue to raise the bar on how the various sectors within the energy transition are done, so that the leaders who are doing it smartly and responsibly are financially compensated for that they're able to put that proof and say, look, I'm doing it better. And they get that reward from their investors, from their shareholders, from their customers, from the marketing potential. So I think eventually and continuously, it will be about showing the proof and reaping that value that's on the market, because the consumer demand and the societal demand is there. And then the others will have to play to the highest lever.
Absolutely. So Circulor tracks the physical flow of material from raw product to final product. So what technologies, are available today that allow this to happen that, say weren't available 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
I mean, honestly, a lot of people are like, you can't do this, but we can't. You can't do this 5 years ago, but but in the last 5 years has really been the game changer. So it's really chip technology, the application of chips to edge compute and IoT, mobile as well, but then also the software layer in terms of machine learning, databases, and blockchain to keep things confidential. So we're not a pure play blockchain. It's a suite that we first start with our customer needs and then back into it with the technology. And then the third thing, so we said chips, edge, and then cloud technology as well. So you asked what was the hardest thing. Like, we are working on a project in the DRC where it's mobile device, facial recognition for the workers. They tag the bag of cobalt. They assign it that identity, and everything is created with technological redundance for a proof of that commodity itself. And then so it's a mixture, I guess, too. It's not just a pure play software play. It's hardware, software, and human engagement. And coupling all of those can be is sometimes challenging, but I think it's where technology is headed in this next era.
Do you know which part of that technology needs to advance faster or something for y'all to do your job better?
Probably IoT and edge compute. Probably the further rollout of 5G and wireless connection. So to get to rare areas. You've already got the European Union and others, and the US as well, working on 6G. So we need to get steady connection to places so that we can apply the IoT, the edge compute in areas that preserve our environment and our community engagement.
Mm-hmm. So, what is something needed by either business or policy or technology to, facilitate the uptake in what y'all are doing or the software?
What's needed? Probably there's a growing patchwork of regulation right now. I mean, we've got the EU battery directive here in Europe. I know that they're looking at it in the US. You've got other requirements in Asia, APAC, Australia. And so one challenge will be the interoperability of all of this so that the data is available around the globe. I mean, we can show you maps on our platform of a piece of lithium moving to various parts around the world from raw material to final production. And so you're talking about tying in a lot of players across the world, and they all need to see that different data, and it needs to be interoperable. So that's something that we work on quite a lot.
Yeah. So one technology that seems to have surged or made a comeback during COVID was the QR code. Everywhere from scanning it to get a menu at a restaurant where they didn't want to hand you a piece of paper, or to sign up for something. I noticed on your website that Circulor's been working with Imperial College London to use QR codes to track sustainability. Can you speak more to that and how it works into your system?
Yeah, I love that question because it takes me back to like 2011. And I was working at the American Wind Energy Association. We put on the most massive wind conference in the world. And our conference organizer was like, the QR code, everything's going to be on the QR code. So 2011 was not its time. He was like a decade early. So it's now, he was a decade early. I said, this is his time. So it's now, and yes, it's getting applied to a number of things. We talk about the EU battery directive. So the directive 2020, what did they put on the regulation that's expected to come out next week? Batteries, modules, and packs must have a QR code on them. So it's back in full scope. So we have a mobile app as well that can read those QR codes. So when you come to battery assets, right? They're important, critical assets to the clean energy transition. Knowing where they are is key. Knowing what their embedded CO2 is key. Knowing that they weren't produced with child labor and we're in compliance with the OECD due diligence guidelines, that's key. Knowing that they're safe, that they have a current state of health. So all of that will be available on a digital passport that we can also provide. So you can see that flow of materials. Right now, we assign it to a VIN number of a vehicle, but yes, it can be applied to a QR code. And then say, Dr. Rhodes, you scan it, or you take your car to get repaired, they scan it, and they can pull up all the details on that, as well as test it for its state of health.
Wow, that's a lot. It's more the humble QR code. But
yeah, it's time.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It was like at the beginning, it was maybe before its time, but it does seem like it is, for multiple reasons is now, maybe seen as time.
Yeah.
So another kind of questions coming a little bit kind of from the from the audience. Does Circulor track or measure carbon offsets and things like of natural resources like forests, mangrove forests, and things like that? It's kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I didn't know if that was something that y'all had also been working on.
No, Dr. Rhodes, we're not working on that.
Okay.
We're taking power that is used throughout supply chain members to do a scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and create a dynamic picture of the scope 3. And then that's assigned to each material in production. So that's how we currently do it. You can also, on our platform for that same material or for that chain link of suppliers can maybe upload their various certifications on ESG, so that then the person downstream can have that entire picture across. I mean, basically it's 3 parts, right? Provenance of material and its journey, this embedded CO2 at every stage, and then also ESG certifications and metrics that the supply chain makes publicly available.
Awesome. I was wondering if you had any kind of beyond I mean, since y'all are really, have a kind of a pulse on how these metals and things are moving around the globe and building out that infrastructure, what do you see as other additional issues around those minerals, something like deforestation in the DRC, or things around, extracting cobalt, things like that? Like, what all was your platform able to kind of to track those things? And then, or also just, what do you see as the state of kind of how that whole system's working out?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And it made me think of something. Right now there's a lot of gigafactory news, right? Gigafactories going into Kentucky and North Carolina and Northumberland and Germany, et cetera. There's going to be about 200 gigafactories put in place by the end of the year.
Oh, wow.
But I think let's not assume that the supply chains are following those gigafactories. So it's really critical that we assess from a geopolitical standpoint, from an energy security and diversity standpoint, where these critical materials are coming from, and that we can use data to create real-time visibility of that flow, and then create accountability, especially in the middle tiers. And then, for instance, a gigafactory in Kentucky that says, well, we're going to source 75% of our product as made in America. They'll first know their current supply chain, and then they can start moving it to American or European or other players around the world that maybe will help them meet their ESG targets and goals.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a gigafactory just going in a couple miles away from me right now.
There you go.
And my wife and I, we actually, ordered an electric vehicle, and it's been delayed about 3 times now. Like, it just, with all the backups and supply chains and things like that.
And those materials can get stuck, right?
Yeah.
They can get stuck. That barge I can't remember the name of it, that was stuck in the canal. I mean, that had we had customers who saw their goods sitting on that barge, right? So, and but maybe they felt better that they could see it, and they said, oh, okay, well, at least I know where my stuff is. It's just stuck getting for a while. But many folks don't know where their things are, and that creates a real sense of lack of sight and vulnerability.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's like sitting there hitting refresh, on your browser or your phone. At least knowing where that is nice. Yeah.
I like to think of it as like writing a check and then think in your mind when it's going to check, when it's going to cash, and before it hits your bank account, but it's still out there.
Yeah.
But you don't know, and you feel anxious about it.
Yeah. Although I think most of the folks in the audience here are students. They may not know what writing a check means.
That's true. Yeah. I know most people don't. We don't do checks over here in Germany. It's been a long time, but it brings back nostalgic feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. Another metal, and this is just something that popped into my head as you were talking. Another metal that we're looking around supply chains, particularly around with what's happening in Russia and energy systems, is something like uranium. Are y'all is that something that you're also looking to? We've talked about other metals, but is that potentially something you'd look to track as well?
Could. It's not within our portfolio right now. Nickel is, I
Okay.
was listening to the previous panelist about nickel. Yes, nickel's in our platform. Of course, not all of it, but we can see parts of nickel, and also the ones that are doing it sustainably and with a low grade of CO2. So they're able to put that, they use our platform to really inject that accountability in the midstream so that that CO2, lower carbon CO2 nickel gets to their end customer, who's also depending on making that brand proposition that they're doing things sustainably. So they use our, if you can see my hands, they use both, want to produce sustainable products, but they need the digital current to show and keep accountability as a through line from raw material to final product.
Absolutely. What are the implications for, like, like with the battery, with the materials, like the like end of life options, recycling, other uses, things like that? Is that something your platform also works with, or how do you interact with?
Yeah, so going back to the same feeling of lack of sight, I think recyclers can't see the volumes that are coming and what type of chemistries are on the market. So recyclers using our platform can also see the volumes, and also, so it would be their quote unquote upstream, right? And then they can use our platform to prove that they're doing it responsibly too, using renewable power, low carbon, less water, and they can use our platform to also assign their end product with certain attributes of proof of origin and GHG emissions.
Absolutely.
Everything has to have an identity these days.
I think and that reminded me of, I think, like we were talking about the QR codes, like, blockchains popped up years ago as well, and they kind of had a bunch of hype, and then it seemed to die down a little bit, but it does seem like maybe both of them are kind of kind of taking a resurgence as of late, which is great.
I think I think hype bubbles are natural. Yeah. I've built some myself that I'm not too proud of. But it eventually comes back down to earth. And I think proper restoration is putting back into focus the customer. And there are so many different use cases for the customer. And build technology, the best people that are working with technology are building it around the customer need. So that's really how Circulor started. How can we do this that we know our customer needs, and build that redundancy and use the technology and not think of a technology as an end all be all or a one-stop shop for solving something. So that's why I'm glad you picked up on it. Blockchain is just one portion that creates the immutable record and lets people kind of collaborate and have that degree of trust.
Awesome. Well, I think that's about all the time we have today for this fireside chat. This has been great. Thank you so much for joining. This has been a great conversation. I think there's only one more thing before happy hour, so I don't want to stay in that way. I don't want to stay in the way of everyone. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to the host. But thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Well, we are coming to an end of the 17th version of Columbia University Energy Symposium. We want to thank you again for your attendance and leave you for